Hi everyone, and welcome to this paper, Black Ghost Studies, Regional England's Disappearing Nurses Post-1950. And it's really just a collection of reflections of where this essay that I wrote came from and where I'd like to take it. So this was presented at University of Cambridge's, there was a workshop on Black healthcare history and archives. Um, and I wrote an essay basically talking about my experience of Black health history, finding Black health history in rural archives in Northamptonshire as well, and really how the archive limited my experience of doing archival research, so official archives, where the real archive was actually the archive within the community and the people that I interviewed and so on. So my PhD was in creative writing, not history, and was for the most part, with some exceptions, written based on eyewitness accounts. It's about Caribbean life in Northants after 1940, but frames that history more as a ghost story with persistent references to ghosts, hauntings, and spirits as a way to think about the history that's being lost with the deaths of Caribbean elders. The draft itself, so the essay draft, is based on my reflections and doesn't really hinge on any specific sources, even though there are citations throughout. I start in the 1940s with not only with what elders were doing in rural Northamptonshire, or the rural Caribbean before they arrived in Northamptonshire, but also the first black community in my area, which was the African American GIs. What I do know is that stories are being lost, especially outside of the major cities. For us, beyond the city environment, we are sort of in the cracks. So too black for white regional history, and often too regional and too rural for popular focuses. So black popular focuses on the cities. I did a lot of oral history interviews that were easy to obtain because many were locals my family have known for decades. So the archive was in my local community itself, and they offer an entry that might be less obtainable because so many of the past interviews done by earlier projects have been also lost to tech developments as well. Folks in the early 2000s, for example, did not expect the quick development of technology. So those earlier interviews were on mini disc. And we don't actually have a mini disc player to play the interviews. All we have are transcripts as well. So a lot of the accents and the cadences and the volume and sort of the distinctness that makes these people very Caribbean um, cannot necessarily be heard as easily. So the essay um, was a reflection based on my PhD experiences, where work like mine does not really does not really is not really included in national campaigns about Caribbean British history, and so we are often left to navigate that alone. I took inspiration from Black feminism, I guess Black feminist research on what we called hyper-invisibility, that many Black women have talked about in relation to being both ignored and under surveillance in public spaces, and then turned that concept gently into the direction of in-betweenness, ghosts, and Black ideas and feelings beyond the mainstream as phantasmic or unintelligible, both to certain white audiences but also to many Black people, especially those in the cities, who can be shocked when I tell them that Northamptonshire has had a Black history going back to the 12th century. So my PhD introduces this term apparitional Blackness to think about how Black stories, feelings, and positions, when they are seen as slightly alternative, can be seen like ghosts, spirits, or even malevolent phantoms. For me, this side of my work on apparitions and disappearing characters develops on hauntology and ghost studies, applying it to a space that in the post-war decades was once relatively quiet and rural too. My essay was just a couple of examples drawing on media and archives where the specifics of small towns and blackness seems better represented in white archives and period dramas than many of the popular works by Black British writers. It's an alternativeness that I've also talked about in relation to my own experiences as a Black man who likes science fiction and cartoons. I tried to give words to what happens when blackness exists in those so-called alternative spaces, which can be both in the countryside, physically, as much as it can be conceptually enjoying things like science fiction, or even what happened when I was looking for Caribbean people in white archives, like through the newspapers, often with no photos of these people. And it wasn't always clear that the characters in the newspapers were Black people being talked about. Um, Dissemination on some of these topics has included YouTube videos. I tend to put my conference submissions and other outputs online so people I interviewed can access my work. That's quite important to me. So YouTube, however, now acts as an archive too for my own history and documentation. I started writing some of these auto-ethnographic reflections and to some extent theorizing my own experience with hauntings, especially via places that have links with plantation enslavement on Substack, which is also open access. I've presented on bits of work that considers this in the Georgian and Victorian period, colonialism, and hauntology, and the ways the shape of enslaved people, heirs and heiresses, walk the streets. I come from a culture, so Jamaica and Grenada, where my elders have talked to me about ghosts and back in the Caribbean, and that is a way of speaking that was lost via immigration policy into Britain and so-called fitting into the local dominant culture. My PhD could also be described as stories from the graveside, and on more than one occasion, people I interviewed took me to the graveyards in Northampton to show me things. I lost 6 people to the project as well, and every week it often feels like it's someone's funeral. So hauntology has become a way to see histories of old Caribbean Northamptonshire as histories of the present, while I'm also moving towards a Black ghost studies as a way to study the colonial past that continues to haunt via things like statues as well. And the ways I'm witnessing this is also via this term apparitional Blackness, because this feels too left field, even for Black British spaces. So I drew on hauntology coined by Derrida, but Black feminists like Toni Morrison were talking of similar things before him, and further thinking about the past speaking back is something also deeply African, where we once talked with ancestors beyond the grave. I've done YouTube, Substack, and started publishing academically. Some of the work on Black ghosts and hauntings is being published as part of a wider body of work I've done on science fiction as a way to extend theories of intersectionality into what I called a multiverse of white supremacy. Developing this, I'm getting to a point where I feel limited by academia and text-based forms of presenting information, and I'm more interested in areas like filmmaking and theatre. So taking this idea of spirit literally, as in when we walk into a room, we can feel something is wrong. Many of us are haunted by whiteness all around us, and this might be better shown on screen. My PhD thesis is not a horror PhD, but a lot of the stuff spiraling out of it treats empire, colonialism, and its afterlives as horror and unobservable and as unobservable history that also goes bump in the night. And again, if you liked this video or got things to say about it, leave it in the comment section, or you can email me at treyventour.com/contact.